Welcome to another episode of Awabapod. I'm Rod Smith from Awabakal, and today's episode is around Black Lives Matter. Today I am in the presence of royalty. To my left, the one and only Debra Swan. Then over to the other side, Jacob Ridgeway, and the one and only Mr. Sean Gordon. Guys, firstly, thank you for coming along and chatting about this topic, which is just ruling, going right across the world right now. And just to start off, how about I'll start off with you, Deborah. How would you like to can you just introduce yourself and give us a few words?
Yes, thank you, Rodney. Like Rod said, my name's Debra Swan. I'm a Gomeroi and Wiradjuri descendant. I lived most of my life on Gomeroi land, and now I'm just living in Awabakal land here at Newcastle.
You feel good about that too, eh?
Yeah, I feel good about being Gomeroi.
Mr. Jacob Ridgeway, tell us a bit about yourself, a man of many different talents.
Yeah, I'm a proud Warramah Gamilaroi man. Born and raised Newcastle, Port Stephens. Worked in the community sector, community engagement, youth work for a while, and then I left, decided to pursue a passion, so I lived up in Queensland for 6 years and decided to become singer-songwriter. I moved back in the last 3 years and pursuing that as a passion and working in media a hell of a lot more now, and currently doing my Masters in Creative Industries.
How's that going?
It's difficult under all these times, not really doing things face to face, but I've been away and travelling and having to adapt to that, so it's I think I'm adapting a hell of a lot more than some others would be at the present time.
Cool. And Mr. Sean Gordon, your repertoire could go on for 10 hours, but can you wrap it up into about 30 seconds for us? What have you done in your lifetime? Who are you?
Well, these days I'm a business owner. I've got my own business called Gidgee Group, and I've been operating there for 2 years. Prior to that, I've been in the Aboriginal land rights space, the political space, and so I've been around the traps for a little bit, but I'm still in the political space, and I do quite a bit at the moment, mainly around Indigenous constitutional recognition. I'm doing a lot of work in that space right now, and that's I guess that's my passion project outside of business, is to continue to pursue that work.
Just a quick question on that. Like, I suppose with someone like myself who's just been mostly sport orientated and in the arts and with music, I've never really been one with politics or put my foot in that way. How do you get into that field? What happened to you? Was there something in life that just happened where you thought, you know what, I need to go down this avenue?
Oh, look, I think you evolve over time. When I look at the Black Lives Matter rallies that happened around the country, I only got to go back to 2005, 2006, when ATSIC was being abolished. I organised a big rally here in Newcastle, another one in Canberra. So I've been through that path. I think you're as you get older, you sort of evolve, and I've led into the political path. So I think it's just been an evolution more than anything. It's not one thing or another. It's just been that I've managed to get to that space where I do a lot of work with politicians and trying to educate them on our issues.
I've heard you speak many times, and I think you are the right man for the job. Now, as I said, today's topic is around the Black Lives Matter movement that is sweeping the world at the moment. So with another trigger that has been, this is nothing new for us, but with the passing of George Floyd, I just want to ask you real quickly, just on that, what is your feeling in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, with all the marches and the protests that are happening around the country and around the world so far? Debbie?
Well, I think we've been protesting for a long time all over the world. Besides America, we've been doing quite a lot here, and it dates right back to early times in 1973 when the 10 Embassy movement, and 65 when Charles Perkins got the bus and did the Freedom Ride around New South Wales in particular. So we've been going for a while, but I think probably now what excites me is the amount of rallies there are, and that they are all over the world. And I think that just helps the cause. when we see all these people, and it's not just people, Indigenous peoples, it's non-Indigenous peoples as well. And I think, like it's been building up for a long time, and it's just so great to see that there are a lot more other people who we would not have expected to join these rallies.
You mentioned the Charlie Perkins bus ride. That stopped in Moree for the pools and all that, didn't it? Was you around there at that time?
I was 8 years old when Charlie Perkins came to Moree.
Do you have any memories of that?
I do. I just remembered that we weren't allowed to get too close because, of course, I was only 8 years old. And I remember afterwards that we did start going to the pool. I never went to the pool before then. And so it was probably another 4 years when I was in high school, because we actually had a pool down at the Mission that we used to swim in. We weren't allowed at the main pool, so we had a pool down the Mission. And when we went to school at the Mission school down at the Mission, the pool was around near the school, so we could learn how to swim in the pool.
Not the river.
Not the river.
The Mihai? Is it Mihai?
It is the Mihai.
The Mihai River.
River at Moree.
Mr. Ridgeway, how are you feeling about everything that's happening around the world in this country at the moment?
Yeah, protest isn't something new, and just to echo what Art said too, like these protests and organisations have even been around prior to Charlie Perkins. You can go back to the docks in Sydney in 1903. There were, not only that, there were people who were black and international coming in that were working on those docks, people coming in on the ships who were following the movement of Marcus Garvey at the time, who inspired that movement in 1924 of Fred Maynard, Sid Ridgeway with the AAPA, arguably the first organised political activist group for our people in the country. And then on top of that, then you got your William Coopers, your Bill Fergusons, your Pearl Gibbs coming after that with the Day of Mourning. So we've been doing this for a long time, and I can imagine some of our older fellas, they're tired. So it's, as a younger person, like picking up the reins and seeing a lot of people from a younger demographic walk these marches, black and white, it's inspiring. But at the same time, being black, we can't turn this off. It's not a 9-to-5 job for us. We have to live it. So I'm optimistic, but we've seen it happen before through history. So do you have the resilience? Do you have the passion to actually walk with us as long as we have to walk? Because we can't turn it off.
True. Shawnee, as you were saying, like going down the political avenue and just seeing everything that's happening now, is there, when you see things that are happening now, does that reignite more of a fire in you, or is that fire just always the same?
Yeah, no, look, the fire's always the same. I think you see, you maybe get a little bit of excitement, the heart rate might go up a bit, but the fire stays the same. I guess, my experiences within this space, I go back to my hometown and think about Lloyd Boney in August 1987. Within 95 minutes of a period of 95 minutes, he's died in custody. 10 years later, I think about Fiona Gibbs, again in Brewarrina, dying from custody. I was living in Brewarrina at the time in 1987, and I lived less than 80 metres away from the police station. And the horrors of that night were quite, it was very scary, because there were people jumping out back fences, there were people with guns, farming community sided, the non-Aboriginal community sided with the police, and it was a scary time. As Jake said, we go back into our history.
Yeah.
And you go all the way back to 1901 when they look at signing the founding documents. Two Aboriginal men walked all the way from Cumbragunja Mission into Melbourne to be at that signing of that document.
Especially coming in that time too. You're a product of the White Australia policy.
Yep. So those two people were there protesting, saying why are we being left out of this historic document that is meant to recognise who we are as Australia.
Just real quickly, do you want to explain the difference between what's happening in America with their movement to the marches and the protests we're having here, where Australians are seeing deaths in custody? Why is ours different to theirs?
Oh, look, I think the most important thing is that we are the first people of this country. Americans, the Black Americans, African Americans, were obviously, brought into the country through slavery and so on. So we're constantly fighting from a very different position. We're not a part of populist culture, and I think why we all look to America when these types of things happen is because of popular culture. And you look at the NBA, which is made up of majority Black Africans. You look at the
NFL.
The NFL. You look at all of those spaces. You know, look at the best golfer in the world at the moment, the best tennis player in the world. So there's popular culture to look to America as the lead. But when I look to our counterparts in America, which is the Native Americans, they're on a very similar path to us. When I look at inequality, when I look at inequity, when I look at all the disparity gaps around health and so on, that's who we should be looking to. But this is a fantastic movement at the moment, and hopefully something comes of it. As Debbie said, it's great to see all of these movements happening right around the world, which clearly says to people we've had enough. But more importantly, to see non-Aboriginal people or non-Black, see white people protesting just as strongly as Black people against this. That's the positive sign coming out of all of this.
Very good, very good. Next question. Look, in seeing a lot of the videos and the films on TV and the photos that are getting on social media, there is a lot of young people I'm noticing are part of this whole movement. So Jake, I'll start off with you. This is for all of you, but just start off with Jake. Are young people more empowered now than in the past? And do you think our young people can do more now than in the past? I suppose that's based on with education, schooling, all that, compared, when I think about my mother, I don't know how many times she'd say, I only went to 6th class. Because back in those times, that's all she could do.
Like even my dad left in year 9 too. So it's like, when I look at that was late 80s. So for me, when I look at it and being empowered, I think there's layers to it. Are you empowered within yourself? Are you empowered within your culture? And those elements around that. And we do have a lot of people that are, but we also have a lot of people who are disconnected because of identity of the systems put in place to oppress us. So how do we lift each other with that in mind? So it's a little bit, there are layers to that, but in terms of the generation that I'm a part of, can we do more? Yes. I look at people in the room right now, like I was exposed to far better education than probably yous were. You might have been kicked out of school for having that snotty nose. It's true. You might have been kicked out of school for that snotty nose.
It is, it's true.
That snotty nose might have forced you to be taken away from your family. You guys were told if you were in school and you spoke lingo, spoke language, it was forbidden. Which then comes down to us where we're at. We've got this watered down, bastardized version of language that's now devalued within our society. And you take away language, you take away a lot of identity in that as well. But what I see when we look at that educational system, I'm a product of going through and learning all these tests, studying for tests for the sake of answering tests for the white answer. When was Australia colonised? When was Australia discovered?
Yeah.
Not invaded. Like you go back to the whole decision of terra nullius. Prove the fact. But our educational systems between primary school and high school haven't changed. It's still driving this narrative. So by going into university, you go into this space now and you've got to unlearn everything for the sake of knowing that it's a lie. You go into a university space because you need evidence to back up everything you're saying. And when you realise, everything I've been told is a lie, how do you feel about that? Do you just carry on and live the lie because you're happy with being comfortable? Or do you sit there and walk with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have known the truth of this country for so long and be like, you know what, if I now know better, it's time to be better. So I think what we've been seeing with the massive response, especially within the Newcastle community, a lot of young people are driving that.
Yeah.
It was one of my first marches here for a long time, from living away. So to see that young people's response, it is important right now. Our older fellas have been marching this cause for a long time. It's time for us to stand up, carry that torch. But also the effects of COVID as well, and the effects that it can have on our older people. Now is the time for us to step up as a younger generation. Why do we want to expose our knowledge from our elders? Our elders are our library.
Yep.
We lose one of those elders, we lose a library of information. It's time for us to step up, get on the phone, learn the history. Learn the history of the true history of our country, but also the local history of what we have here in Newcastle, because Newcastle, despite having racism, has been the leader of a lot of causes. We did have the first government building to fly the flag.
Yeah.
You know, with Town Hall. We did have Newcastle City Council having the first Reconciliation Action Plan. They were one of the first ones. So Newcastle has been a leader in terms of activism and walking alongside Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But we've got to keep that going.
Yeah. So with all the young people that you have seen at the marches, do you think they're understanding why they're there and why they're wearing the red, black and yellow and carrying the flags? Do you think it's just because what they've seen on TV that we're being killed, or do you think that they're learning more now and that's why they're there? They're wanting to say, hey, this has got to stop.
Oh, definitely. It's got to stop. And I think what I've seen, the ignorance from a lot of young people, though, especially in that social media space, and let's understand, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander demographic, there's studies out there to show that we are one of the highest users of that within this country. So when we do look at that and what is going on, there's a lot of people not in our space saying, oh, it's not happening here. That's in America, it doesn't happen here. But what's that going to take for you to change your mind? So the thing that I get scared about is that we have seen photos like this. We have seen videos like this of instances happening within our community. We saw it a couple of days after in Surrey Hills of a young fella just being absolutely face planted when he surrendered.
Yeah.
Someone surrendered the other day in Sydney and got tased. So you're seeing that. But what is it going to take for Australia to take it up to a next level? And what scares me is it going to be one of these cameras actually capturing the death of one of our people? That scares me. Because it should not take one person to die as a person of colour, Indigenous or black, for us to want equality.
Yeah.
It's there.
I think, Rod, one of the things that I see, and Deb mentioned this when she did her introduction, was around her parents taking her to in Moree at the time of the Freedom Ride. So at 8-year-old, she was exposed to that. I look at my kids. You know, I took my kids to. We were at the 10 Embassy for the 40-year anniversary, and to my surprise, when I turned my back, they were up on the front line with all the women sitting down and stopping the. I grabbed the pair of them and dragged them out of there, but I exposed them to that because it was important for them. It was important from my perspective for my kids to understand the challenges of our people and the challenges of history. I think with young people today, we've got to be careful with social media because they've got a different platform. And, when you think about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of these other different TikTok or whatever it is, all these things that these kids are on, you've got to be careful in those spaces that you don't just react and respond to things. So if you're not educated and you're not familiar with your history, you can quite easily get into an argument. But if you're having those arguments, you want to be able to then back up your statements and back up what it is you're posting and so on. So social media can be both positive for our people, but it can also be dangerous if people aren't properly informed about the messages that they're getting out there.
Especially when you look into it too, there's so many people out there in that social media space that believe opinions are facts. And that's the dangerous part of, if you're being baited into someone else's opinion of you and who you are and that identity, and you jump into that, you're allowing them the potential to win at something they still don't have no idea about.
Case in point, Donald Trump.
Exactly.
Deb, I just wanted to come to you on that.
I agree with Sean. I think people jump onto things not knowing all the background information, and that's the sad part. And I think what's happened is that it has overtaken our kids in a lot of ways, and it takes something like this for them to jump up, and not just kids. But I think there's different reasons why we all react or behave differently. And I see for myself, like, the first thing we get is angry, but we also, like I think Sean mentioned earlier, we still have this hopelessness and helplessness in us, and we haven't seen in the past a lot of things come from the rallies and the protests, because they've only been minute. Things that have happened, and I mean the deaths in custody report is a good example of that. That there was a minute process, I guess, about the recommendation, so they didn't follow through all of it, and I think, like we said, I think Jake's earlier about the education system. Even Aboriginal culture is not taught in primary and high schools. It's later in life at universities that you find out that there's more to the story, so to speak. And our elders have competed for a long time with schools in terms of the kids go to school for 6 hours a day. Usually you're just trying to get them ready and that for school in the morning. Then they come home. Sometimes they got some homework to do, and then it's time for tea and bed. So for us to reinforce the cultural stuff has been blindsided,
reduced dramatically,
and reduced.
Yes.
So we don't spend a lot of time teaching our culture, and even though our culture is about observation, not about teaching. So even the style of learning that our kids have been through is not cultural. In terms of it's ours was more on observation and then doing stuff.
And when I look at that stuff too, in terms of language and dialect and the difference in that, so language is something that you can write and speak, where dialect is only a spoken. So where's the value in us in terms of our language, especially within a school system? So if you can't write your language, it's not valued. So to me, the difference within that too, like, that scares me, because we've already got a system that doesn't value our language. So how do we implement that within a white system?
Well, I think that's the thing that oppression causes us. Like that we're still in an oppressed state without us even realising it. Because what stops us from writing up our language now, and I know there's processes we have to go through, but sometimes we all become complacent. And like we said, because schools, and I think schools is a good example, is because our kids spend so long in school learning that process, that then we as parents become complacent or tired or haven't got any energy by the time the kids come home.
And I think, Deb, it's also because you're stretched. When you think about, I think about yourself and the grandmothers against removals and all of that work. That's just one space, and then you go from there to the health space, and then you go from there to dealing with deaths in custody. And we're so stretched in regards to where we have to respond and the urgency of why we have to respond. If you didn't respond in the grandmothers against removal space, then that would get worse. If you don't respond into the Aboriginal deaths in custody space, that will continue to get worse. So, you're constantly being torn apart by everything that we have to respond to and the urgency of all of those issues.
And that's probably a really good point, because we react to things rather than actually thinking of a long-term responding. But we react to everything, and that sort of is just putting out little fires. But we need to be able to put out the bushfire. That's what we need to work on, is putting out that bushfire,
instead
not
of
the little spot fires.
That's right.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question, and Sean, with you talking about GMR, grandmothers and against removal. So this question is for all of you, but Debbie, I'll ask you first, because you are with GMAR, which is Grandmothers Against Removal, and you've worked for DOCS, New South Wales.
Yes.
The question is, so around the removal of our children, I'd like to talk about families, the importance of families, and do you think the removal of our children play a big part of our kids being incarcerated at an older age, creating higher risks to deaths in custody?
Well, yes, there's... through my involvement with Grandmothers Against Removals New South Wales, there has been research and there's evidence there to tell us, and I would fight the fight that to us that is the crux right there, because 65% of our kids who go through the out-of-home care system end up in juvenile justice detentions. And then it gets a little bit higher in percentages for them to go on to jail. And that's all about, really, it's about losing their identity. And we have a sense of belonging, but that system sort of breaks that, and we lose some of our identity. And if you read the Bringing Them Home report from the Stolen Generations, they talk about that. They talk about a lot of those people say they didn't fit in the white world, but they also came home looking for family and didn't fit into that world either. Identity is a really important issue. And like I said, if we talk about the crux of things, that's the fight. We should be really fighting hard about the genocide of this country. And it's all about assimilating our kids to be white. And I could just make one quote that Russell Means says, and he's an American Indian activist. He's passed now, but he says about the United States of America, we can be anything we want except American Indians. And I think it's so prevalent to us. We can be anything we want as long as we're not black fellas.
Sean, I'll go to you next. Yes, around the whole removal of our children and being incarcerated, as Debbie's saying, with those percentages. Do you know any stories or things like that where you've...
Oh, look, I only got to look at my own history. I grew up in a foster home with 42 kids. Yeah. And, some of those kids haven't made it. I've got a photo. I've got a photo of all of those kids together, and the first 5 kids sitting at the front of those photos, all younger than me, have all passed away through different issues, drug and alcohol issues, renal failure, a whole range of things that have impacted they've been impacted from our past. And Deb's absolutely spot on. We have to address this issue. One of the things that I've tried to do to overcome that is to ensure that the trauma I experienced and the trauma of being taken from your parents and being raised in a foster home, although I believe that I had a pretty good upbringing. I know I had a pretty good upbringing. I loved my childhood, and it was great to be around those 42 kids. But one of the things that I've had to deal with over my life is to ensure that trauma that I've dealt with doesn't go on to my kids, and so that my kids, when they're ready to have kids, they are able to then move forward without that. And that's difficult for a lot of our parents, because parents, if their kids have been taken off them, they've been raised somewhere else, the system spits those kids out when they turn 18. When they turn 18, they're spat out. And they've got to find where do they fit, and how do they fit. And sometimes if they go back to their parents, nothing much might have changed in that space, so they just jump straight back into that life. I've lost 4 brothers to drug and alcohol abuse. I've got one in hospital in Dubbo right now that I'm heading out to tomorrow to see. I've only was out there 2 weeks ago putting him in a rehab. but it's not the issues that he's dealing with today.
Yeah.
It's the trauma that he's constantly had to deal with through. You think about rejection. You think about why me? Why was I given away? You think about the issues of identity and a culture and where do you fit and all those things. I was fortunate that I grew up, as I said, with 42 Aboriginal kids and Aboriginal parents, that we had a very strong cultural upbringing. But there are many kids today being raised by non-Aboriginal parents with no connection to community whatsoever. Yeah.
I suppose I'll move on to you, Jacob, because something that you both mentioned about that, you were saying you're fortunate that the fear you haven't passed that fear on to your kids about, being removed. Because I remember, and you talked about, when our people years ago would go to school with a snotty nose, because I remember, as a kid, I can always remember my mother always made sure when we went to school, our shoes were clean, our hair was perfect, and we were dressed neatly. And it wasn't until I actually got older that when Mum would tell stories, that back in my parents were born in the 30s, but back in the 40s when they were going to school, it was exactly that. If they went to, my dad used to tell us they didn't wear their shoes to school because if they were muddy, by the time they got to school, they'd ring the police. Police would come and pick them up and say, "This child's been neglected. Take him away." Do you see? I mean, is that how? I suppose I want to ask you, Jake. What are your thoughts around what they've just said too?
Definitely agree. Like working in that space with kids in out-of-home care, but also Mum and Dad had over 100 kids, foster kids, live with us. I'm one of 6, so we already got a tribe in the house.
Yeah.
Mum hated seeing families broken up. When they got put in respite care, Mum could not stand that, because then you've got one sibling over here, one on the opposite side of town, one might not even be in that area. When we just even looking in that space when I was in out-of-home care, you got places like docks that weren't even looking to put our kids in kinship systems. They just went straight to white family straight away. So to me, it's definitely comes down to identity. When you've already got kids being separated from the core of who they are and disconnected for various reasons, you've put them in a system, but when they're of age, you got that place of neglect. Okay, well, you're on your own now. So you try, like you said, you're out there finding your own. You're trying to find that identity of who you are. And I see that with, some of the kids that I worked with who are now adults now. And I'm playing that mentor still because I don't want to see them fall through the cracks. I don't want to see them, they've been fortunate enough, but they've also been neglected by a system to not address the essentially mental health issues that have come along.
That's true.
So we look at it now and it's like, okay, well, one of the things that being funded is the cure. It's always the cure that's being funded. It's never the prevention.
It's good to think, yeah.
So to me, it's like, why aren't things being put in place prior? Why do you let it get to that space for someone to be removed? Why are you letting it get to that space, like even if they are in care and they're about to be of age, why are you letting them just go and say, you're on your own now, we put a roof over your head and clothes on your back?
Because I think the challenge for me is the value system is wrong in regards to Aboriginal people. So if you look at the out-of-home care space, it's worth billions of dollars across this country, billions of dollars. And organisations do very well in that space. If you look at the justice system, again, worth billions of dollars. And Aboriginal people in Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia are the highest incarcerated people of any people in the world. Of any people in the world.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That is just crazy. But when you look at the value system of that, it costs a ridiculous amount of money, $1,200 per day to incarcerate a person. And when we look at the number of our people in prisons, and that figure, that's costing well over $1 million a year to have one person in prison. Which includes infrastructure, includes the workers, the food, everything that's involved in that space. that money can be best spent, and if we were spending it in the early intervention space,
yeah.
because everything that we do is in the prevention space.
Yeah.
We wait until we've got chronic diseases, and then we throw a whole heap of money at it. We wait until our kids drop out in year 9, and we'll throw a heap of money at it.
Yeah.
But we're not actually investing back here early enough in getting our kids to preschool and getting the education system right, or getting our kids into our own schools and getting those things right, getting the family structures right. The support doesn't come until the wheels fall off.
Yeah,
I think I've actually been saying just recently that do people actually know the definition of insanity? Because insanity is when you continue to do the same thing over and over again with no good results. And so why in Australia do we keep doing that? Not we, but they, the government, is it's like you said, if they don't do early intervention, then they're doing the same stuff over and over again with no good results. No good results come out of removing kids and placing them in the out-of-home care, and that's all over the world. The care and protection systems all over the world, they will tell you their systems fail.
Do you
I
think
said
maybe
the same thing to Rod before. I said, imagine having a system in place for you to succeed for 200 years, and you have the year 2020 just to expose that you're still not doing it right. What you're doing is still not right.
And a good point, like you brought up, like $1,200 a day. Now, who would spend $1,200 a day to lock someone up? You don't even pay them $1,200 a fortnight on Centrelink payments to be able to live. So, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what insanity is. You know, like spending this ridiculous amount of money. And like we said, it's the same with out-of-home care. All the money that goes into out-of-home care, where I think it's 75% of the funding goes to out-of-home care, and not even the other 25% goes towards early intervention. So it's to me, it appears like we want our society to be sick. We want all this to happen because we don't spend the money where it should be spent.
That's why I wanted to ask you. It almost seems like they want us to fail. Yeah, and just before we wrap up the with our kids and families, just with GMA, do you want to just explain a little bit more about that? Because GMA, New South Wales, it's more about, as you said, with docs, it's about just removing the kids and putting them with whoever, but with you guys, it's about putting with their own mob, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, what we do is we talk about advocacy. So we go in early and we advocate. There's a document that we've produced called the Guiding Principles of How to Engage with Aboriginal families and communities in the Care and Protection System. Big title, but that's what that's about. It's about, as soon as there's some trouble going on here in a family, then it's about calling family in. Having discussions with family early up. And if the child does need to be removed from their parents, they have grandparents, they have aunties, they have uncles, they have cousins. You know, we all know what a blackfella family look like. It's not two adults and 2 children. It's more like 10 kids and 2 adults.
So and 3 beds.
And 3 beds, yes. So we know what that looks like. So there's no excuses not to keep these kids with family. And the out-of-home care system is a system that diminishes what our families look like and what our families can do. And that's what we fight for. We fight that straight away, see somebody in trouble. And the thing is, we all at times have trouble in our lives. It's not, things like drug and alcohol, they're social issues. They're not Aboriginal issues specifically. Domestic violence is not a specific to Aboriginal people. So all these issues are social issues of this country.
Introduced
not
issues.
just in, and generally introduce stuff. So, so we should be looking, and that's what we do at GMA, Grandmothers Against Women in New South Wales. We look at how to keep the kids out of the system. Because don't get me started on how then the law systems work.
All right. Next question I'd like to ask you all is, how does Australia come to the terms with its past when studies show that 3 in 4 Australians hold a racial bias stand against Indigenous Australians? Mr. Gordon.
That was a report that came out through the Canberra University. It's not surprising when you think about three in four Australians have a racial bias against Indigenous people.
Could we say it the other way too?
We could say it the other way, but
all the things that we've talked about, the removal of our kids, the youth, and all those.
I think the challenge we've got to do.
But we're not racial. Ours would be more anger and frustration.
Well, ours. You've got to put it in an historical context. And when you put it into an historical context of a people that have been existing here for well over 60,000 years, and the scientific proof demonstrates that. And then within this short space of time, from the time Cook sailed the shores here in 1770 and put a flag up at Possession Island claiming the east coast of Australia to 1788, when Arthur Phillip decides to come and settle here in New South Wales. You then got to look at it in that context. And the context is that Arthur Phillip was given orders to reach agreement with the natives and not to harm anyone. That didn't happen. And so that set that very first engagement set the relationship moving forward to where people had just been pushed to the fringes, early dispossession. We then led to massacres, and so there's this been constant history. The challenge we have as a country, and when I look at those numbers, it'd be really nice to try and understand why those numbers are the way they are. Is it because there is a denial of the history? And that non-Indigenous people aren't willing to accept the guilt of those things occurring, the dispossession, the massacres, the brutal killings, the slavery. Just a couple of weeks ago, Scott Morrison makes an announcement that Australia, has nowhere near the history of America. Yeah. We don't have the slavery, but here our people are in chains.
I know.
It's just crazy that the Prime Minister of the country has this denial. Tony Abbott recently, when he was a Prime Minister, makes a statement around Aboriginal people living on country as a lifestyle choice. These are the types of perceptions that we're constantly having to deal with. And so the work that I do, I actually work on the right side of politics. I should say the right of politics. Sometimes it's the right side, sometimes it's the wrong side, but I actually work with politicians on the right of politics.
Gotcha.
To provide them with a broader education of our history and to give them an understanding. And so, during the Black Lives Matter what rallies that were happening around the country, what I did was made an effort to work with the New South Wales Senator to connect him up with those families in Brewarrina who experienced Aboriginal deaths in custody, for him to get a direct understanding of the impact going back to 1987 to how those families are still dealing with that impact today. It hasn't gone and it hasn't disappeared.
Yeah.
And those three families that I spoke to all said the same thing. There was no justice. That they felt that the system that is meant to be fair and just to them, that is built on a foundation document of the Constitution, which says that we will treat all people fair and just. The system did not treat them fair and just when it came to the lives of their family members. And that's, I think, the real challenge that we have. Add to that inequality, inequity. When I look to America and I look at the Black Lives Matter protests and I look at the looting, there were a lot of white people looting. Yeah. And that tells me that America's got a bigger problem than just this racial problem. They've got an inequality problem where people are being oppressed of all different backgrounds. And that's the difficulty we have in this country. As Aboriginal people, we are at the very bottom of the rung when it comes to inequality, when it comes to equity, when it comes to justice, when it comes to fairness. And the challenge that the country has is how do we bring this group of people up and put them at an even keel where we're recognised for who we are as the first people of this country, recognised for our rightful place within the country, and the only thing that connects non-Aboriginal people to that is the Constitution. So I do a lot of work on ensuring that Aboriginal people and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are recognised in the Constitution, which is the founding document of the country. So I can talk a little bit more to that, but I want to hear what the others have got to say as well.
I'll go to Jake next. As a young person growing up in this day and age, are you surprised by those facts that 3 in 4 Australians hold a racial bias stand against us?
I'm not surprised, considering the educational system hasn't changed. Like I mentioned before, like if people are still having to learn the same thing that's been proven wrong, then obviously those biases are going to be there. And with that, the sense of entitlement, I should get this because who I am. I just found it weird that when these events started occurring, it was during Reconciliation Week for us. It wasn't just the death of George Floyd. We had a sacred site, absolutely torn down from a mining company in WA.
One of the biggest mining companies in the country, Rio Tinto.
So it's that thing. That's all crazy to me. And then when we look at the word reconciliation, of people coming together to form friendly relations, why is Reconciliation Week for us having to move forward to sit at the table? Would you ask someone who's been a victim of domestic violence to go apologise to the person who assaulted?
Yeah.
You wouldn't ask it.
Yeah.
So why are we coming to the table when it should be the opposite way around in terms of reconciliation? So all these systems and that of that are built around us to make the movement, it has to be the other way around.
Yeah, I totally agree with you with the reconciliation. It's not us that invaded a country. It's not us that did the massacres. It's not us that took children away, but yet they want us to drive it.
And you have these reconciliation action plans. I'm like, oh, it's a great plan. But what about the middle word, action? What are you putting into play?
So Debbie,
but that's the sort of world we live in, where they expect the oppressed to fix their own problems. Like the oppressors won't admit. And I think
come to the table on our terms.
Yeah. And this country, I don't like using this phrase, but white privilege is well ingrained into people that that's the thing that needs to be shifted. And people, and I've been doing stuff now, some workshops with unconscious bias, and getting people to let that unconscious bias become conscious to them, and then they may be able to address it. If you can get it out of that unconscious state. And people really need to have a look and do, and I do this in our women's group that I run, is called cultural self-awareness. But people should be evaluating themselves. The self-awareness should come in, or self-reflection. Everybody should do that on a regular basis. Because even if you're doing something and you know it hasn't worked, why would you go and do the same thing again? Yeah. So it's about reflecting on how you behave, how you perform in your job, whatever it is. Unless you can regulate yourself and understand that if that's not right, and I think that comes with empathy and compassion, and I think we've lost a lot of that. I think we've lost empathy and compassion for people, and therefore we don't self-reflect. We don't look at, well, what I did there, that was wrong. I need to go and apologise and ask, how can I do it better?
Yes.
And we don't do that well enough. They don't do that at all.
And I think, Deb, to add to that is that we don't see the value. And one of the things that that's been clear over the work that I do is this lack of value for Indigenous people, and and that's something that needs to be addressed. And when I think about Black Lives Matter, I sort of think about a whole aspect, from sites, cultural sites being destroyed for the purpose of mining. Yeah. That's not valuing our culture. You're not going to go and destroy the cathedral up here to put a mine in place. And
That's
even
true.
in some smaller places, you're not going to go and destroy the local church or a historic library. And in Western terms, they have these historical places. The current site of Awabakal at Annell Street, Wickham, is an historical building, historical in Western terms. But when we think about it, our terms, what's below that is more important because that site used to be a ceremonial ground. So it's a significant historical site for us. When there's no value around your culture, there's no value around your language, there's no value around your identity. They're the things that need to be addressed before Australia starts to shift. And that's about dealing with this unconscious bias. It's about people reflecting on where is our place in society. And it's not enough just to have plaque names on buildings or a picture here or something else there. And even reconciliation plans, it's not enough just to have those things in place. It's the things that you do that will make a difference and create a change. And right now, I think there is this undervaluing of Indigenous culture, particularly around the recent bushfires. Our knowledge and understanding of how to manage landscapes could have made a massive difference. But there's this constant undervaluing of what it is we have to contribute. Coronavirus, there is so much that non-Indigenous Australia could have learnt about how we managed our way through coronavirus. And I watched, my bit of bias because my wife's the CEO, but I watched the way in which Awabakal responded and the way in which our community responded. There would be a lot of non-Aboriginal people out there envious of what we had and what we did. Elders getting food delivered, making sure that they were still getting their medical checkups over the phone. There's this whole network and system that we have, which non-Indigenous people don't have. They don't have that same sense of community, belonging, caring, fostering. And the way our community responded to Corona towards our own communities, our own people, I can guarantee you I don't think that was the same response for non-Aboriginal people because it's not there. And that's where that undervaluing, needs to be picked up.
I remember someone saying, it was about 2 weeks ago, and they're like, oh, you need to have all your knowledge stored somewhere. And I'm like, our knowledge is on the land. Our knowledge is within our people. It's within our art, stories and songs. Why does it need to be in this white ideology of a museum for you to put value into it? Why does it have to be in a building locked up and stored away for you to see the value in where you live, where you come from, and the true identity of this country?
It's true. I just want to finish up on that. And Deb, I just want to ask you lastly, like with that, we were talking about the 1965 freedom ride, and as you said, when it came through Moree, probably at that time it might have been 3.8% of Australians were racially biased. And now we are here, 55 years later, and it's only 3 out of 4. Does that shock you? That's.
I suppose it does in some ways because of the population growth that's happened since then. But we haven't dealt with it, and that's why it's still there, and that's why it's so high, because we haven't dealt with it in the right way. And when I say we, I don't mean us as Aboriginal people. I mean we generally as a society haven't dealt with it, and they're the topics we've been covering, like people looking at their biases and about then how to change that bias. So no, it doesn't surprise me, but it still makes me sad that there's that many people.
I was shocked.
To even look historically on that too, if we look at that and some of these movements, whether it be the 10 Embassy or the Freedom Rides, we also got to acknowledge there were a lot of white allies.
And university students.
And they were university students.
Right.
So it's never been this whole thing of like completely black versus white. It's a system. It's a system that's continually chosen to oppress us, because at the end of the day we've had to utilise a white voice in some way to get our voice out there. There was there's documents through newspaper articles. The Maloney family within Newcastle, they used that newspaper articles to get our voice out there with a lot of these, you know, with Fred Maynard's work, with William Cooper and Bill Ferguson. So we had those in place. So it's important to acknowledge we had strong white allies that were willing to put their backs against the wall with us as well. So
it was the same in Moree. There was a man on the council who went with Charlie Perkins and took Charlie Perkins into the pool. And he sat there and he said, fighting for now for the kids to be able to go to the pool. And when they did the anniversary, excuse me, they did the same. When Charlie came back, they both went into the pool. He was still there. I've forgotten his name. It's terrible. But they went back to the pool. But it would be interesting, though, I think, to see how come university students jump onto the rallies and stuff. Because it happened back then, and it still happens today.
It was happening.
The majority, probably the majority of some of the people who were there were university students or had been to uni just recently. So that sort of interests me in terms of, like you said, once they don't understand till they get to university, is because they don't do that learning in the primaries and the high schools. Is that one of the reasons? But that would be interesting to find out.
A big part of it is leadership, and leadership at the and I'm not talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership. I'm talking about non-Indigenous leadership. If you look at our history and the amount of the conversation around recognition and all of those things, it's been going around for a long time. But the first Prime Minister to really jump on board with it was surprisingly John Howard, who pushed for a reconciliation process. So it was John Howard, and he pushed, and that's when Reconciliation Australia and those other things came about.
We had those March
2000. What about Whitlam?
Whitlam did lots of good things, but he wasn't specifically pushing for that type of process. But at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership. And if we're going to convince the 97%, because we only make up 3% of the country, if we're going to convince the 90% of the country to support Indigenous people with whatever it is, with a voice, with treaty, with the truth-telling process, then it's up to our national leaders, political leaders, to do that. And I think, the Scott Morrison's in an ideal position. It's whether he's got the will to challenge those in his own party to say, I'm going to do this. And you know what? In the space of politics, there's no real, there's no one we can stand up and say there's been a real champion here for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues. Because whether it's the Nationals, whether it's the Liberals, whether it's the Labor, whether it's the Greens, Fisher shooters, you name them all, they've all done very little. What we've got and what we have, our people have fought for those incremental changes over a long period of time. So with the public pressure, the marches, the rallies over all of those years, they've been crucial to this. So we have to continue to keep doing those rallies.
It's proof that we're stronger together as well. So when you look at that space with the referendum in '67, we couldn't vote. Our mob couldn't vote. And we got a majority vote there. Small win. We take it, but like I said, there's got to be action behind it now too.
And corrections are, people could vote. So there's legislation pushed through in '58, I think, that allowed our people to vote. But what it didn't do was the referendum didn't count us within the census to be able to get a clear understanding of even our voice. Just by knowing your population and by knowing your numbers, gives you a clear indication as to what type of voice you have. And then when you know you're 3%, that you're 3% of the population, you have to then be clear in your strategy as to how you move forward and what it is you can fight for. I want to congratulate Grandmothers Against Removal in New South Wales, because their work, the incremental changes they've made, and to get the work they've done recognised in Parliament, and the policies recognised in New South Wales Parliament, has been a massive achievement. And it's been I've been watching them from a distance. But
Well, maybe
you know.
maybe someone might have to have a little chat with him, and as he said, he is the voice on the inside to make it the right way.
But for me, that's where the changes
Yeah,
come. It's
yeah.
incremental changes, and we've got to be strategic on how we do that. If we just go out and say we want this
Yeah.
to happen, it's not going to. The reality, when you're 3% of the population, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So our success has come over a long 200 years.
All right, we're going to finish up here, and I'll go with you, Jacob, first. This question, last question: how do you think we move forward and make changes? So does this, this doesn't keep happening?
Comes down to education. So within our, my generation, we've got to understand the history of where we were to where we're at, and have a good understanding of the policies and procedures that are in place that are prohibiting us to move forward further. We have to start having these conversations, like my generation, the way we are having this generation now, to learn and pick up a few things. I didn't know what you just mentioned before, in terms of the 58 and being allowed to have that vote. So it's crucial for me to understand that a little bit further. By having these conversations within your education in a white space in school, but more importantly your cultural education and grounding, we need that to move forward, because we need to be the advocates from what they started.
Yeah, Shawnee.
Look, for me, I think it's about Australia accepting it coming to terms with its history, being able to non-Indigenous Australians being able to reconcile with themselves, the relationship they've had with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and then looking at a way in which we can, I guess, cement that relationship moving forward.
Yeah.
Given to where we are, I think one thing has clearly come out is that as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we are relentless in regards that we're not going away, but we're also quick to forgive if we're able to get the relationship right moving forward. So for me, the Uluru Statement from the Heart, it's about honouring that process of a voice, a treaty, and a truth-telling within our country.
Very good. Deb, how do you think we can move forward and so things can change?
Well, I think that both gentlemen here have said what I feel as well, and I think we've given answers all throughout this interview as well. People really need to look inside themselves and look at what needs changing in them for them to come and sit at a table with us, because we've been happy to sit at the table for a long time. So we've, governments and people like that, and I think, like Sean said, with Grandmothers Against Removals New South Wales, we've got a little bit of that where we're sitting at the table and they're making decisions that we recommend from that point. And you've got to really do both. You've got to sit there, but you've got to still come back to your community, and you've got to be able to, I think Jake said about uplifting our community to do it in a way that's going to see good results for us.
Yeah. I would just like to say that I agree with all of you, and I think when you see all the social media feed and just on the news, I think it's the education side. I think everyone keeps asking, why are blackfellas like this, and why are they arguing about this, or no, why this and why that, and that's where I think and it's about when we teach the past. And as we all know, it's not about, we don't want white fellas to feel guilty. It's just that it's that education and the understanding. And then once they know the whys, when something like this happens and there's big march rallies, they're not all over Facebook saying, why this and why that. At the end of the day, I just think we got to start. As we know, the truth is not being taught, and we want the truth taught not as guilt, but just as the truth. And it's a part of our history.
I think clearly is for every action there's a reaction. The action of Australia rallying in relation to Black Lives Matter, the reaction to that now is there's a massive campaign happening right across mainstream media around violence against police. You look at it on the morning, all of the morning shows, they're showing more and more each day around police being assaulted and so on. And so that's the response. And saying, well, wait up,
Yeah. Yeah.
The 3% are playing the victim here, but we're going to flip this on their head. We're going to flip it on its head, because we're the police. We're also victims within this,
Yeah.
and to a large extent, I think they're right in regards to some of what they're doing. But what we've got to do is find balance within the process and find common ground where the police accept that what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
accept our wrongdoings, and then we find a way forward.
Yeah.
But by just pitting each other against each other, you don't actually come up with
Yeah.
solutions. You just continually, respond to it in a negative way, and
maybe that's
Yeah.
why they
And
don't want
keep-
to teach
and
it.
keep
Maybe
us
that's why they
divided.
don't. Yeah.
and you keep it divided.
Maybe that's why they don't want to teach the truth, because it'll make people understand more. Well, look, Mr. Sean Gordon, Mr. Jacob Ridgeway, Miss Debra Swan, I would just like to thank you. I personally learnt a lot more. It was a very interesting, educational, and I quite enjoyed that. Debbie, just to finish off, how was it for you?
Yeah, it was really good. Usually we have discussions like this and I get flared up and angry and stuff, so it was much better. It was a really good discussion, and I think we all handled it very well.
Jake?
I just enjoy sitting around here with so much knowledge.
Mm.
Yeah,
It's
as
like
that-
you're saying,
as that new
our
as that new
education and knowledge
generation,
isn't in libraries. It's,
Yeah,
a lot of it is like
it's
this.
within. So with my travels and where I've been and moving back here a couple of years ago, that reconnection is important to the people within our communities. But also, Newcastle's always been that point of travelling space. We've always been a crossroads, so we have the ability within Newcastle to learn a lot from a lot of people from walks of life within the Indigenous space. So it's crucial to understand those points of view.
I think it's important that we understand each other. We're constantly arguing that the non-Indigenous Australians are in denial of our history. We've got to be careful that we also don't deny them of their history. And so the concept of trying to change names of states and suburbs, or removing statues and that's just that. In my opinion, that's just petty politics. Because what we're in effect doing is then denying non-Indigenous people's history, and this process of what we're trying to do and in us trying to give recognition of our rightful place isn't to deny someone else's recognition of their place, but it's trying to come up with a space where we all sit, where our statues might sit alongside their statues and give balance to the conversation, rather than saying that one history is more greater than the other.
Well, hopefully with education and knowledge, that one day the understanding of our history, that they might look at their statues and want to pull them down themselves.
Yeah, well,
as you said, it
may
does
not be that they're pulling down their statues. It may just be that our warriors are standing alongside Cook and making it quite clear that there was an opposition, or there was another perspective, and there will always be the view from the ship.
Yep.
And there will always be the view from the shore, and our view on the shore was very different to what Cook was looking at from the ship, and we've got to try and weave that into what we determine is Australia moving forward.
I think you're seeing a lot of those fellas change their names just off the back of what they knew. Know it being wrong now too. So that's an awesome thing too. Like, we're not triggering you changing the name. You've identified it. You know the history behind it, and you're changing it. So respecting that and letting them do so.
All right, I'm going to wrap us up there. I'd like to thank you three very, very much for coming on this episode of Awabapod of Black Lives Matter. Mr. Gordon, Mr. Ridgeway, Miss Swan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.